Judy Erola. Judy Erola is a woman of firsts who has set an extraordinary example for women across Canada. She began her career as a radio and television broadcaster in Sudbury, Ontario. At CKSO-TV, she made history as the first woman employed by a Canadian television station as a weather reporter. She was a founding member of Sudbury's first theatre group and was an accomplished theatrical performer in the 1950s. She was the first woman in Sudbury to hold the position of account executive at CHNQ, a local radio station. She has enjoyed notable careers in the mining, political, and pharmaceutical industries where women executives are scarce. At the same time, she has made significant contributions to healthcare in Canada through her volunteer roles as Director of Health Partners International, Chair of the University of Ottawa Health Administration Program Advisory Board, past Chair of and Fundraising Chair of the Child Health Institute of Canada. She is a life member of the Federation of Medical Women of Canada and of Science North Sudbury. She was honored by the Federation of Medical Women of Canada with the May Cohen Award for putting the Federation's vision statement into living action. She is also an honorary member of the College of Family Physicians of Canada and was a public member of the college's Relationship with the Healthcare Industry Task Force that established guidelines for such relationships. As the first woman to hold the position of Minister of State for Mines and for the Status of Women, she championed women's rights and fought for Native women to maintain their legal Aboriginal status. She fought for the creation of Section 28 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, guaranteeing all of its provisions equally to male and female persons. She was the first woman ever appointed to the Cabinet's Priorities and Planning Committee, which decides the direction of government policy. She also held portfolios for Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs and Minister of State for Social Development. Judy continues to be an advocate for women in politics and sits on the advisory board of Equal Voice, a nonprofit organization dedicated to electing more women to political office in Canada. As an influential member of the Federal Liberal Party, Judy Erola was one of 3 women, together with Monique Bégin and Sharon Carstairs, who broke ground for Canadian women in political leadership. These 3 women stand next to Nellie McClung and the Famous Five as inquisitive, smart, educated, brave women who helped move women's issues and healthcare forward in multiple ways during and after their time in office. According to Between a Rock and a Hard Place, a historical geography of the FIMS in the Sudbury area, Ms. Erola never forgot her roots, and I'm quoting, "As a federal cabinet minister, she was a major force in the reshaping of Sudbury through the creation of Science North and the funding of Laurentian University's Center in Mining and Mineral Exploration Research. Within the Finnish community, she has consistently been a major supporter," end quote. In a 1981 article in the Ottawa Citizen, she is quoted as saying, "Women must go beyond their women's organizations, become presidents of chambers of commerce, sit on library and hospital boards, act in all facets of community life. That's where changes take place. Work for the system, and it will work for you." Throughout her life, Judy Erola has lived by this mantra. Mr. Chancellor, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and in the name of Senate, I ask you to confer the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa upon Judy Erola.
By virtue of the authority vested in me as Chancellor, I admit you to the degree Doctor of Laws honoris causa. Congratulations, Dr. Erola. On behalf of all assembled here today, I should now like to invite our newest alumna, Dr. Judy Erola, to address Convocation.
Thank you so much, Carol Herbert. You sure did your homework. I'm tired after listening to that. Well, it's a beautiful June day, a perfect day for a convocation, isn't it? Mr. Chancellor, President Chakma, Dean Carmichael, Carol, parents, grandparents, nieces, nephews, siblings, et al. It's a wonderful day. Class of 2015, congratulations. You're done. Well, almost. You've got to listen to a few minutes of what I have to say, and then we'll get on with the real show. And I promise to be very brief. I've been given 10 minutes, and I guarantee you I'll stick to it maybe a minute or two more. Well, first let me say how honored and humbled I am by this honor, and thrilled to become an alumna of this distinguished university, which boasts such an incredible alumni, including my very favorite author, Nobel laureate Alice Munro. I'm sure you're all very proud of her. This faculty has provided you with the skills and knowledge that didn't exist a generation ago. I was born in Northern Ontario many, many years ago. I should put another many on that. And I am the daughter of a dairy farmer. I know, there weren't many dairy farms in Northern Ontario. He was an avid reader of popular mechanics. By the way, it still exists today. I looked it up, and it's still there, and it's gone through all the new technology. Anyway, my dad, after reading the latest edition, said that within a decade, according to popular mechanics that is, we would be talking pictures in a box in our living room, much like the way we listen to radio. I thought he was going bonkers, to tell you the truth. Little did I know that 20 years later, I'd be in that box. It was really the rawest form of reality television. Everything, you people in this faculty will appreciate that some of the things that exist, like videotape, did not exist at that time. We did a lot of going to black, while the one cameraman drove this camera wildly around this studio, trying to pick us up where we were supposed to be. But it was very, very primitive times. People in the city, and this is actually the truth. Is anybody here from Sudbury? No, not a soul. Oh, hi. Well, you'll remember Durham Street. It was full of appliance stores and furniture stores. And people were lined up in front of the furniture and appliance stores, watching for their first glimpse of television. And what were they watching? Anybody guess? Test pattern. But they were very exciting times. That's when I learned my most valuable career lesson. When you find your passion, it doesn't matter how many hours you work, how much money you make, you love what you are doing and what you are learning. And I hope that you will experience that same passion when you find your particular niche. This passion followed me all the way into politics. Now, when I went into politics, again, many, many years ago, we didn't have the communication tools that you exist and use today. The only thing we had were newspapers and radio. No mail, no faxes, no Twitters, and and the word disruptive technology didn't exist. But we did have the telephone, which is still a very powerful weapon. Now, you may be familiar with the constitutional issues of 1980-81. Anybody here know about that time? No? Okay. Dark ages, I know. Uh, well, much has been made of the Night of the Long Knives when Quebec became the focus of attention. However, I discovered shortly after that hard-won equality clause that had finally made it into the Constitution that it had been rendered useless in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms on the night of the Long Knives. The premiers had added an override which effectively made it useless. As the minister responsible for the status of women, I immediately confronted Prime Minister Trudeau with the fact that they had just excised 50% of the women of Canada from the Constitution. The Prime Minister's response was, we didn't do it, the feds didn't do it, it was the premiers. The decision had been made, the documents were signed, and it was final. Furious, and there's no one quite as furious as a woman scorned, I said to the Prime Minister that the women of the country would change the Premier's minds. To say that the Prime Minister was surprised by my response is an understatement. By the way, it's 30 years later, I can tell cabinet secrets now. I couldn't for a long time. So there's a certain amount of freedom when enough time passes, and you're still around to tell the tale. But at any rate, the Prime Minister made it clear to me that if my role was public in such a protest, I would be breaking cabinet solidarity, and my resignation could be expected. I replied in the heat of the moment, there was no point in being the minister responsible for the status of women if the women didn't have any status. It was that simple. But I went back to my office and we went to work. Why was I so confident that we were going to win this battle? Well, let me give you some background. It all began in 1967 during the Pearson years, when, at the urging of the formidable Judy Erola, one of the first federal cabinet ministers and a force to be reckoned with, she badgered the Prime Minister of the time to establish a royal commission on the status of women. It was an exceptional commission, a commission that did not gather dust much as those royal commissions generally do. The commissioners were prominent Canadian women, plus 2 token men. That's what I call them. They were really good men, and there are lots of good men, we know that. They held hearings across the country. And by the way, the executive director of that commission was my dear friend and colleague, Monique Végin, who tells me that it was the most exhilarating experience of her life. The women who appeared before that commission were ordinary women, and I hate that word, ordinary, but they were the backbone women of the country, nurses, farm wives, secretaries, teachers, women from all walks of life. And they discovered during these hearings that they shared much in common. They had common experiences, and their demands for change were also extremely united. When all was said and done, the report produced 167 recommendations, but equally important, it connected these women across the country as never before. By the way, I just checked recently, approximately 75% of the recommendations have been enacted. And that, I think, is quite remarkable. The work of that constitutional, not the constitutional, the Royal Commission, accelerated when the hearings for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms were held. Again, they held hearings across the country. And then brilliant women, and I mean truly brilliant women, argued cogently for an equality clause, a statement of equality. And it's such a simple one, and it sounds so easy. Notwithstanding anything in this charter, the rights and freedoms referred to in it are guaranteed equally to male and female persons. Simple and clear. But the premiers didn't think so. It gave them a headache. By this time, the status of women bureaucracy in Ottawa and my political office had a very important and detailed database of who was who in every women's organization in the country. They were the Catholic Women's League, the Women's Institute. By the way, I will always think of them very fondly because my mother was a great member of the Women's Institute. The teachers' organizations, very powerful. The nurses' organizations, again, very powerful. In short, every mainstream women's group in the country we had connected with throughout this time. By the way, the militant feminists did not trust the mainstream women, or me for that matter. I was that blonde from the Northern Ontario bush who had not been anointed by the feminist intelligentsia. I was once called a blonde imperialist, if you can imagine. Anyway, I did trust the women of Canada, and I knew they were angry. At this time, I would really be remiss if I didn't pay tribute to the women of the House who whipped their caucuses to the cause. Pauline Jewett of the NDP. Anybody here know who that is? Wow, I'm batting nothing today, am I not? Yeah. Flora MacDonald. That rings a bell. Hallelujah. Yeah, but these two were not only fighters in the House. It was strictly a nonpartisan battle. They took on their provincial premiers in their respective parties and wore them down. And they were superb. I remember talking to Flora and said, we can't find Premier John Buchanan, who was the Premier of Nova Scotia at the time. She said, never mind, I'll find him. He used to take my sister out. And he told me later that he actually kissed her. So she said she harangued him for something like 2 hours, and he said, okay. Many of these women came to Ottawa to man telephones in both my political office and the Office of Status of Women. The chief bureaucrat from that office felt obliged to inform me that using ministry offices for political purposes was a violation of parliamentary rules. I said, pooh. I retorted that if fighting for the status of women was not the business of the Status of Women office, then what was? It took 10 long days, but one by one, the premiers capitulated. The last holdout was Premier Blakeney of Saskatchewan, but even he could not resist the pressure. Finally, the Minister of Justice, Jean Chrétien, stood up in the House of Commons to announce that the Equality Clause had been reinstated without override. And of course, we were jubilant. There has been very little analysis of that momentous time, and to this day, very few people, especially the young women of today, know the backstory and why they enjoy equal pay, maternity leave, pensions, all the things that young women today take for granted, and so deserving, have no idea how hard fought that was. It changed lives not only for women, but for gays and lesbians, and established a basis for equality that could not have happened without the Charter. So much has happened in the last 30 years. When I look at the young women of today, my granddaughters, my grandsons, their attitude toward each other and society has totally changed. One of the reasons why I feel so happy about that charter was that the battle indicated that the women of Canada were willing to risk their political lives across borders in order to make these changes happen in the country. The first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, the magnificent Bertha Wilson, was a fight to behold because the Prime Minister at that time was very reluctant to appoint her. That's another story and really needs a new book. How did all this happen? Well, I'm just going to refer briefly to what's happening today. Unlike the spontaneous movements, the so-called revolutions spawned by the internet, this was fueled by solid study. The Equality Clause was based on solid evidence that had been examined carefully for many years. And so-called ordinary citizens stood their ground when push came to shove. But what did they have that some of the movements today don't have? They had the benefit of exceptional leadership and the machinery of government to follow through and put recommendations into action. No internet, no Twitter, no Facebook. Could this happen today? In recent times, we've been bombarded by spontaneous protests spawned by the internet, everything from Wall Street to the most recent umbrella protests in Hong Kong. But did these protests lead to change? No, they fizzled. It's clear that technology is no substitute for good policy. These protests lacked substance, leadership, and machinery to follow through into action. The women of Canada, over a period of 25 years, slowly and painfully developed a body of work that produced the Equality Clause. They had leadership, courage, vision, passion, and structure, and we owe a great deal to them. So, just a few random thoughts. Okay, I promised. I've got about 5 recommendations for life that I think you could take with you and hope they carry you through. So, first one, be curious. Curiosity didn't kill the cat, it just made him a better cat. Be kind. I'm not talking about a now and then kind of kind, a conscious kindness that you practice every day. It makes the world a much better place. Read a book. I say that because it also helps you to learn, but it also is a wonderful salvation if you have to travel and sit in an airport. Number 4, okay, just a minute. Give your thumbs a rest. Pick up the phone and call your mother, your parents. You'd be surprised how they love to hear from you. Number 5, I think this one is, vote. By all means. And the last one, this is your day, celebrate. Thank you.